Now
on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
Let's go. 6:06 on O'Connor and Company this Wednesday morning at 6:35. Cal Thomas will be here. 7:05. Hans von Spakovsky on the efforts to keep Trump off your ballot. 8:05. Adam Gillette, Accuracy and Media. And at 8:35, Jamie Baxter, Exodus 90. I'm Larry O'Connor alongside Julie Gunlock. Julie? Good day to you.
There I am. Good morning.
There you are. Joining us right now, here she is. She's Angela Morabito, who is often heard in your chair, Julie, or Patrice's chair on various days. She is, of course, with the Defense of Freedom Institute spokesperson and former Education Secretary spokesperson. Talk about the state of affairs in our Ivy League elite universities. Hey, Angela, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Larry, and good morning, Julie. Thank you both for having me.
You know, we have spoken quite a bit about the resignation of Claudine Gay, and I made the point, Julie and I both made the point earlier, that it's this is a good thing because it's wrong that she has this position, knowing obviously that she's guilty of plagiarism, and no student would be allowed to get away with this. But more disconcerting is what she didn't get fired over. You know, what she said under oath in Congress, the fact that she's allowed anti-Semitism to foster on that campus, and that she in no way made any sort of correction to the climate on that campus, which endangers Jewish students. I mean, you would think that would be a fireable offense, Angela, but it's not.
I completely agree. You would think that any university leader who chooses not to protect their Jewish students from rampant anti-Semitism on campus would be disqualified from being a university leader. And the fact that a so-called elite university like Harvard was willing to tolerate somebody who did that, somebody who let anti-Semitism run rampant, it is really a shame. And this entire scandal has laid bare the moral bankruptcy that exists in higher ed, and particularly at places like Harvard, which we used to think of as the top of the top in education. But I would say that that reputation is now long gone because of how the university has chosen to handle this issue.
Angela, I'm interested in your thoughts on how this will be sort of framed. We've already seen the BBC saying, she's a victim of the culture wars. We've seen all these other, sort of mainstream outlets saying that it's because she was a woman, because, so there's sexism and it's racism. How do you think this will be framed going forward?
Well, Dr. Gay herself has tried to frame this issue in her resignation letter. The word plagiarism is mentioned 0 times in that letter, as is the word anti-Semitism. So the idea that she is the victim here is, 1, totally wrong, and 2, being propagated by Dr. Gay and people who are aligned with her politically. There are really 2 sets of victims here on very different levels. The first group is the Jewish students that she failed to protect, and the second group is the people that she plagiarized. They're getting lost in this narrative when they need to be at the center.
Angela, at the same time that Governor Ron DeSantis and other Republican governors sort of seized the moment after the pandemic and after the lockdowns to sort of make some course corrections in K through 12 public schools in their states, is this also an opportunity for the governors and the Republican leadership in certain states who do have influence over their state college and state university board of regents to make a similar course correction? I mean, Massachusetts is going to be Massachusetts, Harvard's going to be Harvard. But at the university level and at the state college level, the governors and the Republican leadership, since it's tax dollars almost entirely funding those institutions, they can make a similar shift, right? And there wouldn't be anything wrong with that. In fact, that should be encouraged, shouldn't it?
It should. The shift is not toward any political ideology, or at least I don't believe that it should be. That shift is just toward enforcing the civil rights laws like Title VI, like Title IX, that are already on the books and that so many institutions are choosing not to uphold. So this moment is really a reckoning in higher ed. I believe that it is long overdue, but better late than never. This is a chance for everybody, whether you have a child in college, you're an alum who's concerned about your alma mater, even if you're just a taxpayer who's really concerned about what institutions your federal taxpayer dollars have been supporting. the scrutiny that is on these colleges should not go away. I think in the wake of COVID, and especially during the pandemic, everyone kind of woke up to the fact that you couldn't just put your child on a school bus to your government-assigned school and expect them to get a good education. Yeah. Now, everyone's realizing that you cannot drop your child off at a so-called elite institution and expect them to get a quality education. So we're seeing these systemic problems all the way through, which isn't good news. The only silver lining here is that sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Well, what will happen next at Harvard? Who do you think will be the next president? And will Harvard, considering they are not just their reputation is on the line, but they're losing money, millions of dollars from very wealthy donors. Do you think they will make a change, or do you think they'll just double down?
Well, if Harvard wants to hang on to what is left of its reputation, and if Harvard wants to actually serve the students who pay quite a bit of money to be there, it needs to course correct. I don't have a ton of optimism that that is what will happen, but it is an opportunity. Like, this problem is far bigger than just the presidents of Harvard and UPenn. Well, now the former presidents, I should say. It's really a systemic issue, so it requires a systemic change. I've already seen some folks on Twitter saying that the next president of Harvard must be Black and must be female. And for someone to say that race and gender are qualifications or disqualifications for a job proves that some people have really learned nothing from this, that they're not looking at merit, they're just looking at literally what a person looks like.
Right. But that's the DEI mentality. It's the DEI mentality. Right. Many people, we've been talking about DEI for several years now, but there are a lot of people who are just hearing about it now in the wake of this story. And when they find out what DEI actually does and how it's employed at the university level, K through 12, but also in corporations and in our public sphere, they're repulsed by it because it goes against what most Americans believe, freedom, liberty, and non-discrimination is supposed to be about. You worked at the Department of Education under Betsy DeVos. You've seen how leadership can actually make a difference here. Do you think that this presidential election from this story, from what we saw during the pandemic, from the power of the teachers union, and also by the gender wars going on right now with transgender women, men, competing in women's sports in the academic levels K through 12, do you think this presidential election will really focus on this? I think it's a winner for Republicans if they can hold true to their values. Do you think that this could actually be a huge election issue for the next Republican nominee?
It can be. Quite frankly, it should be, because education, and this is going to sound a little bit contrary here, but I promise it's not, it's that education is not really a partisan issue. You don't have to be particularly conservative to believe that men shouldn't be playing women's sports. You don't really need to be particularly conservative to say that parents should have the ability to choose where their child will learn and the ability to say no if a school wants to teach their child values that are contrary to what the parents believe. So this is 100% a winning issue for anybody who has common sense. And quite frankly, right now, we're seeing so much more of that on the right than we are on the left that wants to either celebrate these things that are causing so many problems in education, or arguably worse, just pretend they don't exist.
We got to leave it there, but if you like what you heard, you should check out Defense of Freedom Institute. It's what Angela Morabito and the team over there are focused on a regular basis. And hopefully it's the kind of agenda and clear thinking that will help influence the Republican nominee and hopefully the next Republican president. Angela, always good to talk with you. Thanks for joining us, and Happy New Year.
Thanks so much. Happy New Year to you.
It is 6:15 now. WMAL traffic and weather every 10 minutes first on the 5s with Jamie.
WMAL. Making sense of the news. Live from the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios.
Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
Traffic and weather brought to you by Hadid Carpet Cleaning.
WMAL, making sense of social media because big tech can't be trusted. Download the WMAL app to stream us for free.
Donald Trump is officially and formally appealing the decision in Maine to keep him off of the ballot. By the way, a lot of people are like, it doesn't matter if blue states keep him off. It doesn't matter. He can win the presidency without the blue states. Maine factors in a big way, by the way. If you look at the Electoral College map, if you look at a lot of the routes to 270, remember Maine proportions their Electoral College votes by congressional district. It's not a winner-take-all state. And oftentimes that district could be the difference maker. So Maine is an important state, but it's also constitutionally and electorally important. I mean, you talk about Democrats constantly talking about disenfranchising voters. Is there anything more disenfranchising than removing the leading candidate from the ballot, a man who was just president 3 years ago, just arbitrarily, one unelected official, the Secretary of State in Maine, making this decision? It's despicable.
It is, and incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, that one person can make this decision to disenfranchise voters.
The appeals process will now begin in Maine. It'll head to the Maine Supreme Court. We might get a U.S. Supreme Court decision expedited to preempt that decision anyway. We'll see. Hans von Spakovsky will join us, talk about the legal wrangling at 7:05. That said, Governor Ron DeSantis was in Iowa. He's all in on Iowa right now. This is, I mean, it's critical for him to finish either first or a close second in Iowa to keep his chances alive. And I was pretty critical of him. You remember when the lawsuit, or when the civil, or was it criminal charges? Now I don't remember which charges at this point were levied against Donald Trump in New York over the Stormy Daniels situation. Mm-hmm. And you remember DeSantis came out the next day and in criticizing the decision to bring charges against Trump, he also said something like, listen, I don't have a lot of familiarity with paying hush money to a porn star. Yes. And I was like, you did not need to do that.
Right.
You didn't need to go there. And by the way, saying hush money to a porn star is buying into anti-Trump rhetoric.
Yes.
It's not hush money to a porn star. It's a non-disclosure agreement, an out-of-court agreement with money exchange. It's not hush money.
Right.
And DeSantis, and I think it was a huge mistake for him to do that. He can run against Trump and yet show righteous anger against the use of the law in such a twisted way against Donald Trump.
And this has been popular with Vivek. Vivek does this all the time. And it is popular. It's made Vivek very popular.
I have to say, yesterday, DeSantis, months later, sort of got on track because he, I think, responded properly with regard to this latest attack on people's ability to vote for the candidate of their choice.
So it would open up a Pandora's box that just would not be good for this country. But I think more importantly is not the way the Constitution was meant to actually be applied. The 14th Amendment is obviously in effect. It's not that it only affected those years where it was ratified, but there's got to be some due process and there's got to be some evidentiary basis before you can just go willy-nilly kicking people off the ballot. So I think they're going to take it up. And I think they're going to dispose of it relatively quickly. But regardless of that, my job is to amass a majority of the delegates. And we're going to continue to be doing that. And let's just be clear. If one of Trump's competitors were kicked off the ballot, he would be spiking the football. He would be cheering it. That's just a fact.
All right, that's probably true. But...
Absolutely
probably unnecessary to point that out. See, here's the thing about DeSantis. I mean, he could have easily just come out there and said everything that he said and also said, yes, the 14th Amendment applies and there should be due process. But here's the bottom line. January 6th wasn't an insurrection. And so to utilize January 6th and just decide and claim and make up the fact that it's an insurrection when it wasn't, and you know how I know it wasn't an insurrection? Because not one person of the 1,000 people has been charged with insurrection. So don't tell me that something that isn't an insurrection is an insurrection just so you can keep a guy you don't like off the ballot. See, he couldn't go that extra step, but he doesn't, and I don't understand why he doesn't. He's got terrible advice.
Yeah, and he can't help but, punch Trump in the face, the sort of, he'd be spiking the football. He'd be thrilled.
Yeah, so
right?
what?
Yeah.
So what?
Yeah.
It is 6:23.
Now
on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It is 6:37 on O'Connor and Company. Thanks for tuning in here on this Wednesday in your nation's capital, third day of January 2024. It's 7:05. Hans von Spakovsky on the latest effort to get Trump removed from ballots. 8:05, Adam Gillette, Accuracy Media. And then at 8:35, Jamie Baxter from Exodus 90. We'll explain all that coming up. It's Larry O'Connor with Julie Gunlock. Good morning, Julie, and Happy New Year.
Good morning. Happy New Year.
And Happy New Year to our friend Cal Thomas, syndicated columnist who joins us now. And Cal, I don't know about you. Listen, you've worked in the media your whole life. And, media companies can be merciless when you're fired. You're sent packing. You don't even get a chance to say goodbye to your audience sometimes. I don't know about you, but I'd love to get Claudine Gay's exit package here. She gets to keep her $900,000 salary. She basically still has a gig at Harvard, although I don't even know if she has to show up for it. I mean, as firings go, this is a pretty good way to happen.
Yes, like you, Larry, I've been fired many times, and I never got this kind of deal. I'm sure there are teachers all across America, whether they be in public schools, private schools, or at universities, who are looking at this $900,000 salary deal and say, where did I go wrong? This is just the most amazing thing. She blames racism for her dismissal. Now, that's just a joke. There are so many successful African-American educators. I think of Tom Sowell out there at Stanford. I think of Condoleezza Rice. I think of the woman from whom Gay plagiarized. I think she's from South Carolina, a successful educator. This is such a bogus excuse. And, of course, good old Al Sharpton had to weigh in on this, and I turned to him for all theological and political questions because he is a rhino, a reverend in name only. I don't know if you knew that or not. And, and he blames the corporations. He says, in addition to racism, the corporations put pressure on Harvard, claiming they weren't going to give any more money unless they got rid of her. So it's never about competence. It's never about honesty. It's never about anything except what the political gods want it to be. It's really ridiculous. I congratulate Elise Stefanik, the congresswoman from New York, for bringing all of this out. And she says she's not done yet. She's going after some of these other universities. But I just say finally, guys, that the problem is not at the top. I got a column on this tomorrow. These universities were founded on biblical principles, on a search for truth, the idea that truth could be found. They educated young people in things that really mattered, that would help them get a well-rounded life, a decent education, and a great job. All of that's gone now. They had a woman on Jeopardy last night who was in charge of drag queen shows at Harvard. I rest my case.
Well, but Cal, I'm curious your thoughts going forward. Do you think there will be any meaningful change, not just at Harvard, but at some of these other schools? Because it was also University of Pennsylvania and MIT up there in that hearing with Stefanik and Virginia Fox, and so this isn't just a Harvard problem. But do you think, because these universities are losing millions of dollars from very wealthy contributors to their universities, do you think that will change anything, or do you think this will stay the same?
Well, it's a good question, Julie. We'll have to see. One of the top contributors has said he's going after, you mentioned MIT, he's going after MIT next. But the problem is the entire education system from bottom to top. You've got people now graduating from high school who can't read a grade level. You've got all of these other things, the rewriting of American history, critical race theory, drag queen story time in kindergarten classes. The basics are not any longer being taught. This is not the kind of education we got when we were in school. I mean, I graduated from American University in Washington. There were none of this stuff was going on. We got a good education in our public schools, and I went to Walter Johnson High School, North Bethesda High School. They didn't deal with any of this stuff, and you had to pass tests, and you were expected, whatever your gender or race was, you were expected to score on tests, or you didn't pass. All of that's out the window. So I think the entire education structure in this country is corrupt, and it needs to be redone. Yeah.
Well, and you're right to give credit and vindication to Elise Stefanik. She's 2 for 3. The clock is still ticking on MIT. But not only has this been so revealing of what's going on in these elite institutions, but I think it's also been revealing of the media. We know what's going on in the mainstream media. Their reaction to this story, Cal, talking about how this is a new conservative weapon against colleges. The New York Times said it's a right-wing free beacon, and Christopher Rufo, who attacked Claudine Gay by using this plagiarism accusation. You know, the media is for the most part an echo chamber right now. And I think people at AP and New York Times and Washington Post, they look at this and think in their hearts, there but for the grace of God go I, because they all copy and paste each other. Frankly,
right.
It's kind of revealing to them that they don't see plagiarism as that big a deal, considering they're journalists.
Well, I noticed that Joe Biden didn't have anything to say on this because, of course...
That's right. Yeah, he's waiting for Nick Kinnock to write it for him.
Yeah, that's right. And, of course, Barack Obama, who was lobbying that Claudine Gay be kept in her position, has remained blissfully silent as well. Yeah, you know, the New York Times and the Washington Post should be embarrassed. They shouldn't be attacking the Washington Free Beacon for actually practicing journalism. This stuff has been out there for some time. They just ignored it.
Cal, it's always great to talk with you. Are you back home? I mean, you're always all over the place. With
yes, just returned last night from Costa Rica, where I bought 15 bags of great coffee. I'll be selling them on the street corners.
Oh, yeah. Did you see any sloths? I was amazed when I was in Costa Rica that sloths are like squirrels there. I mean, they're slower, but they're everywhere.
Yeah, I did, yes. Of course, I'm very familiar with sloths. I'm from Washington.
Thank you, Cal. Drop the mic.
All right, guys.
It's 6:43. It's Larry O'Connor with Julie Gunlock on O'Connor and Company. And, Julie, we try to be positive, upbeat, optimistic about the news of the day and the cultural trends in our society. And I've been very upbeat about the pendulum swinging to the side of sanity when it comes to transgender policies and the activists kind of having to be back on their heels and actually having to reverse a lot of the trends that we've seen with regard to transgender athletics, transgender procedures, all of that stuff, and allowing parents to actually have a say in what's going on with our kids' lives. In most places, in most scenarios, I think that things are moving in the right direction. That said, we just got word from the International Olympic Committee that appears that entity, that organization, is going in the exact opposite direction.
That's right. This is really concerning because it seems like they are not going to require testing, hormonal testing now
for testosterone levels.
Yes.
I mean, but even that was a bare fig leaf. Basically, what they said was that, and this. Let's just be clear. This is all about men competing as women. Everyone who says, well, there's really no competitive difference here. Really, then why don't we see a whole lot of women competing in men's sports?
Yeah, you're right. You're right that wasn't the worst of it. It's that they will no longer require athletes to undergo hormone level modifications.
Right.
Okay,
you can have your complete and total male testosterone level and compete as a woman. According to the International Olympics Committee. It's a new framework for transgender intersex athletes. It was dropped yesterday. And I love the way this is written up. Who wrote this? Dropping controversial policies that required competing athletes to undergo medically unnecessary procedures or treatment. That's what was controversial. It was controversial that athletes had to actually go through hormone treatments to reduce their testosterone levels for a competitive advantage. In the 6-page document, the IOC outlined 10 principles which it described as grounded on the respect for internationally recognized human rights that sports competitions should follow. It also said it will no longer require athletes to undergo hormone-level modifications to compete. Quoting now from the committee, this framework recognizes both the need to ensure that everyone, irrespective of their gender identity or sex variations, can practice sport in a safe, harassment-free environment.
That is
and
rich.
Recognizes and respects their needs and identities. What it doesn't recognize and respect is fairness.
It doesn't, and safety.
And safety.
It does not respect or recognize the safety of women who will get hurt. We have seen this at that. For instance, the latest example was that lacrosse. It wasn't a lacrosse, a field hockey game, where a boy slammed a puck into a girl's face. She lost her teeth.
Yep.
You have a volleyball player,
and that was at a high school. Yeah, my son's a volleyball player, and he would he plays co-ed beach volleyball, and he has to pull back when he's playing, otherwise he will hurt the girl on the other side. You know. Yeah. And it's obviously recreational when they play co-ed volleyball. It's to have fun on the beach.
You know, it's very clear from the very beginning that the people that they are concerned about are the so-called transgender identifying athletes.
That's right.
Not the women who have to compete against these much stronger human beings.
Just wait for women's. Women's boxing is an Olympic sport.
Yes, it is.
So what happens when a male identifying as a female athlete has no impediment and no medical restrictions
requirements
to compete in women's boxing
to lower the testosterone
That's
level.
right.
So now you are going to you could have
go in there with your
a
fully
full
intact male
yes.
body
Yes.
in every way, chemically and physically.
Yep.
Male body competing as the one fig leaf that proponents of transgender athletics used to throw in our face was, well, they go through hormone treatment.
Yeah,
they
manage the hormones.
They manage the hormones, so their testosterone level is not as high, so there's no danger.
Let's just be clear on that. Doesn't matter, because once you go through puberty, your wingspan, your lung capacity, your heart is bigger.
Your bone density,
your bone density is everything
yes.
is bigger. And so it didn't matter. But you take a male-bodied person, you go through, you do some sort of hormone therapy.
Yeah.
That doesn't shrink them. It doesn't make them a woman. It doesn't give them a woman's body.
It's outrageous.
But now they're even doing away with that.
Tuesday's framework replaces guidelines the IOC released in 2015, which would put a limit on athletes' testosterone levels and required some of them to undergo treatments the IOC now describes as medically unnecessary. Before 2016, the IOC required athletes to undergo genital surgery. That they threw out the window in 2016. Now they're throwing out the testosterone requirements. According to Chris Mosier, who was the first out trans athlete to compete on a U.S. national team, that was the sprint duathlon, he applauded this release yesterday and said it takes the next step in centering human rights as the foundation of sport. They're all talking about human rights and personal dignity and all of that jazz. They're never mentioning safety and fairness because
they don't mention women either. And I will I will tell you this. Riley Gaines has said this over and over again. You got to stop competing, and it's a horrible thing. Yeah. There's going to be a generation of female athletes who are not going to be able to compete because they cannot put themselves in these situations.
Shame on the IOC.
Shame on these athletic organizations.
And the U.S. bodies, the U.S. Olympic Committee, and if necessarily even U.S. Congress should step in here and say, all right, we're not going to support this. We're not going to fund this. You want to have your Olympics, you have it without the United States. And I assure you they will change, because the Olympics are propped up by advertisers,
just
sponsors,
like
and networks, just like the UN, by American dollars. And this international body cannot. Let me tell you how extreme this is. The college systems here in America, the states who are allowing transgender athletes right now, and the NCAA, they wouldn't even touch this with a 10-foot pole. They wouldn't come close to even considering this, let alone approving it.
But now they might.
Now they might have to.
Yeah.
It's 6:54.